Well, now on BBC2, a welcome back to Alex Cox to introduce a new season of cult films in Moviedrome.
Good evening and welcome to the 4th season of Moviedrome. This year's selection of cult and obscure ephemera will take us from Finland to Lawrence, Kansas, and from Notting Hill Gate to Cape Fear. Most Moviedrome movies aren't big hits in Hollywood, either with cinemagoers or the studios that finance them. In fact, if there's a typical Moviedrome film, it was probably financed by a major studio which fired the director halfway through and then pulled out entirely, leaving the cast to pool their savings and finish the film in another country under the directorship of a generous used car dealer. Don't be surprised if many of the films we show were made by the likes of Joseph Losey, Terrence Malick, Richard Rush and Orson Welles, all of whom were given the old heave-ho by the conventional movie scene. Likewise, don't be surprised to find them making films about tormented artists, to wit, this season's biopics of Mishima, Tchaikovsky, and Lenny Bruce. If you love big, glossy Hollywood productions starring Robin Williams and Steve Martin, Robert Redford and Meryl Streep, stop watching. Turn off now, be warned. The drome may prove damaging to your taste. But if you actually like films that were shot in abandoned fun fairs in Lawrence, Kansas, or in the bowels of Russian rocket launching tubes, stay tuned. Clint Eastwood made 3 films with the Italian director Sergio Leone and 5 with the American Don Siegel. He parted company with Leone in '66 and with Siegel in the '70s, and since then has been pretty much his own director. Though he usually bequeaths the director's seat to someone else, he hangs onto the reins, so to speak, producing all the films in which he appears. Certain movies for certain reasons he directs himself, and most of those show substantial debits to Don Siegel and Sergio Leone. Leone and Siegel were top-of-the-line action directors in their respective countries. Leone collaborated with Robert Aldrich on Sodom and Gomorrah and directed Eastwood in 3 millennial spaghetti westerns. Siegel, who had begun life as an editor, graduated to top-flight B-movies such as Riot in Cell Block 11 and The Killers. Siegel and Eastwood made Coogan's Bluff in 1968. It's an effective film about an Arizona sheriff who comes to New York to catch a bad man. It was his first film without a horse or a mule. In 1970, they both made 2 Mules for Sister Sarah, a dismal imitation spaghetti western, co-starring Shirley MacLaine. Eastwood appeared in several imitation Italian westerns, actually, including Ted Post's lively Hang 'em High and Joe Kidd, a wretched rip-off of The Big Silence, which we saw on Moviedrome last year. In 1971, Eastwood and Don Siegel made the majorly successful Dirty Harry, and in 1979 they did Escape from Alcatraz. But in between, Eastwood and Siegel found time to make another film, one that's extremely weird and uncharacteristic of them, and that's the film we're going to see tonight. It's another western, set in the Civil War, and called The Beguiled. The Beguiled is unlike anything else that Siegel did. For a start, it's mostly about women. Eastwood is the only male character in the film. Nor is it a conventional cowboy film. There are no cowboys. Instead of his usual heroic self, Eastwood plays a deserter from the Union Army, wounded but game for whatever's going on in a weird Gothic house full of obsessive Confederate spinsters who decide to keep him. It's a cross between A Jacobean Tragedy and Ambrose Bierce, which is not very far apart at all. Bierce was a Civil War scout who later became a cynical journalist and vanished in Mexico looking for Pancho Villa. He wrote about a dozen short stories set during the Civil War, which are just extraordinary, really vivid and grim and beautifully written. Bierce's Victorians, or pre-Victorians, are very modern in their evil banality. So are the villains of Jacobean tragedies, although a tad more flamboyant. And the characters in The Beguiled? Well, they're sort of 60s-ish. In fact, The Beguiled comes from that happy time when it was possible to experiment with cinema, to play with film language, with multi-exposures and dream sequences, the era of Midnight Cowboy and The Last Movie. Today, when the American film industry makes a film about the Civil War, they fill it with lies about honor and nobility and the privilege of being gunned down carrying the flag, and call it glory. Wilfred Owen would not approve, but Bierce would be amused.